My name is Dana Freeman, and I'm 34 years old. On Christmas night, my father shoved my 9-year-old daughter off her chair in front of our whole family. "That seat belongs to my real granddaughter," he said. "Get out." Lily hit the floor, her water glass tipped. Nobody moved. My mother told me not to make a scene, and my sister looked at the ceiling like the answer was up there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I helped my little girl up, brushed the crumbs off her sleeve, and I said 4 quiet words that made my mother go still and my father lose the color in his face. Over the next 90 days, those 4 words turned into a courtroom, a bank subpoena, and a truth my parents had been burying for years. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet people finally say the true thing out loud, and the ones who counted on their silence learn exactly what a calm woman can do with a folder and a little patience. If stories about dignity, boundaries, and hard-earned justice are the reason you're here, do me a favor. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe, because what my family hid took me 3 months and 1 recipe tin to drag into the light. Let me take you back to that table because I've replayed it more times than I'd like to admit. The house smelled like ham and cinnamon. My mother, Sharon, had the good plates out, the ones with the gold rim she saves for people she wants to impress. Lily had been so excited. She'd worn the green dress in practice saying, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," in the car. There were 11 of us and 10 chairs at the main table, plus a card table by the window nobody wanted. Lily slid into the empty seat next to me, the way any kid would. Then my father, Roy, crossed the room and pulled the chair out from under her. She went down hard. The glass tipped, and water ran off the edge onto her dress. "That seat belongs to my real granddaughter," he said. "Get out." He didn't even look angry. That was the part that stayed with me. He said it the way you'd tell a dog to get off the couch. Across the table, my sister Meredith found something fascinating on the ceiling. Her daughter Sophie stared at her plate. And my mother, God bless her performance, said, "Dana, don't make a scene, it's Christmas." I knelt down and helped Lily up. Her chin was trembling, but she didn't cry, because she's braver than every adult in that room. And as my mother reached for the gravy like nothing had happened, she leaned toward me and said it low. "Just for me. Blood is blood, Dana. And you're not." I stood up. I picked up my purse, and I set a single folded envelope on the tablecloth. "Before we go," I said, "I found Grandma's will." You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. My mother's hand stopped over the gravy boat. My father's jaw went slack, and for 1 long second nobody in that dining room was breathing. I didn't stay to enjoy it. I took Lily's hand, walked her to the coat closet, and got us out the door before the shaking in my knees reached my voice. We live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Millbrook, about 25 minutes from my parents' place, and I have never been so glad to have a door of my own to close. In the car, Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, why does Grandpa hate me?" I could have lied. I've lied to protect her before. Small lies, the kind mothers tell. But she deserved better than a fairy tale. "He doesn't hate you, baby," I said. "He's scared of something, and scared people are mean." She thought about that. "What's he scared of?" I told her the truth, which was that I didn't fully know yet. But I promised her one thing, and I meant it with everything I had. Nobody is ever going to push you out of a chair again. Not while I'm breathing. Here's what I didn't tell her. The envelope I put on that table wasn't Grandma's will. It was a blurry photocopy of a bank statement. 1 page, folded to look official. I bluffed. I wanted to see their faces. And their faces told me everything. I make my living keeping other people's books. That night, for the first time, I opened my own family's. I should back up and tell you what it means to grow up as the one who doesn't quite fit. I was the second daughter, 4 years behind Meredith, and somewhere in my childhood a story took hold. I didn't look like the Freemans, people said. Too dark-haired, too quiet. My mother would laugh it off at parties in a way that wasn't really laughing it off. "Oh, Dana came from somewhere else entirely," she'd say, and everyone would chuckle, and I'd stand there feeling like a suitcase left at the wrong gate. Meredith got the dance lessons and the new car at 16. I got hand-me-downs and the sense that asking for more was rude. I don't say that for pity. I say it because it's the soil everything else grew in. The one person who never made me feel like a guest in my own family was my grandmother, Ruth, my father's mother. Grandma Ruth taught me to balance a checkbook at 9 and to make her lemon bars at 11. She'd hold my face in both hands and say, "You've got my mother's eyes, sweet girl. Don't let anybody tell you different." She passed 14 months ago, at 88, in her sleep, in the house on Cedar Lane she'd lived in for 50 years. At her funeral, I couldn't stop crying. My mother told me to pull myself together, but here's the thing I keep circling back to. A few weeks before Grandma died, she gripped my hand from her recliner and said something I filed away as comfort. "You and Lily are taken care of, you hear me? It's handled." I thought she meant heaven. I was wrong. Money was tight that year, and I won't pretend otherwise. My bookkeeping business kept the lights on, barely. I had 11 regular clients, mostly small shops downtown, and I did their payroll and their taxes and their year-end reconciliations from a desk in the corner of my bedroom. The rent on our apartment had just jumped $90 a month. Lily needed braces, and the orthodontist wanted $2,000 up front. I'd started doing the math you do when there isn't enough, the quiet subtraction where you decide which good thing your kid loses first. Art class was on the chopping block. She loved that class. She drew Grandma Ruth from memory once, the reading glasses and the apron, and it was so good it made my throat hurt. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That's what you tell yourself. Meanwhile, my parents took cruises. Meredith got her kitchen redone that spring, granite counters, the whole thing, and posted about it like the rest of us needed the update. I remember standing in my own kitchen, the one with the drawer that won't close, thinking about something Grandma Ruth used to say. She'd promised, more than once, that the Cedar Lane house would go to whoever needs a roof the most. I never let myself hope it meant me. Hope was a luxury, like granite. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, a piece of mail arrived that I wasn't supposed to see. It had been forwarded from Grandma's old address, rerouted twice, and it landed in my box by mistake. It was a bank statement for an account I had never heard of. My mother's voice came back to me. "Your mother didn't leave anything, honey." I opened it. I read financial statements for a living, so I know what a normal one looks like. This one wasn't normal. It was a certificate of deposit in Grandma Ruth's name, $113,000, held at the credit union on Route 9. That number alone made me sit down. $113,000 was not nothing, but that wasn't the part that made my hands go cold. The CD had been closed, cashed out, and the date it was closed was 3 months after my grandmother died. I read it 4 times to be sure. Dead people don't close accounts. Someone else does that. So I looked at the line that shows who authorized the withdrawal, and there was a name printed right there in the transaction record. Sharon Freeman, executor, my mother. I want to be clear about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. It was the floor tilting. My mother had told me, to my face, at a funeral, that there was nothing. And here was proof there had been a great deal of something, and that she had taken it, in cash, after Grandma was gone. I did what I always do when the numbers lie. I got methodical. I photographed every page with my phone. I made a folder on my laptop and I named it Ruth in capital letters because it felt like keeping her close. Then I sat in the dark of my little apartment and made myself breathe. I didn't know yet what I was opening. I only knew that the numbers were saying something my whole family had spent years trying to keep me from hearing. And numbers don't cry at funerals. Numbers don't lie. My first instinct was to drive straight to my mother's house and throw the statement on her table. I'm glad I didn't. I've watched enough clients blow up their own cases by tipping their hand early, and I knew if I confronted her, the papers would simply vanish. So I did the harder thing. I went slow. I made a list, the way I do for a messy client, of everything I actually knew versus everything I merely suspected. I knew a CD had been closed after death. I knew my mother's name was on it as executor. I did not know what my grandmother's will actually said because I had never seen it, and every time I'd asked, I'd been waved off. So I called the county probate office on my lunch break, heart pounding like I was doing something illegal, which I wasn't. I asked whether a will for Ruth Freeman had been filed. There was a pause and some typing. Then the clerk said yes, one had been filed and admitted, submitted by the executor, Sharon Freeman. I asked what it said. She read me the summary. Estate divided between the decedent's two children, Roy and Meredith Freeman. I felt my stomach drop. Not Roy and his descendants. Not the grandchildren. Nothing about Cedar Lane going to whoever needed a roof. Just Roy and Meredith. Clean and simple. Exactly the version that cut me and my daughter out entirely. But that wasn't the will my grandmother described to me for years. Somewhere between what Ruth wanted and what got filed, a different document had appeared. And if this filed will was the fake, then somewhere out there was a real one. I just had to find it before they did. If you've ever been called not real family by people who share your last name, stay with me, because what I found in the next few weeks changed everything. Comment Lily if you're rooting for my girl, and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. I couldn't do the legal part alone, and for once, I let myself admit it. Asking for help has never come easy to me. I'm the woman who fixes her own sink and files her own taxes and tells everyone she's fine. But this was bigger than a leaky pipe. So I found an estate attorney named Susan Okafor, whose office was above a bakery 2 towns over, and I laid out my folder on her desk. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and she didn't promise me the moon. Here's the honest picture, she said. If the filed will is valid, your standing to challenge it is weak. Grandchildren usually don't inherit directly when the children are living. My heart sank into my shoes, but then she tapped the CD statement. This, though, a certificate of deposit closed after the date of death, cashed by the executor, that's not an inheritance question, that's a fiduciary question. That's possible misconduct. She explained the tools, and I wrote everyone down. We could request the executor's formal accounting. We could subpoena the bank records. We could demand every document the estate touched. Then she asked a question that changed the direction of everything. Did your grandmother ever mention which lawyer drafted her will? I closed my eyes and reached back through years of Sunday dinners. A name surfaced, dusty, but there. Halloran, I said. There was a Mr. Halloran downtown on Main Street. Grandma liked him. Said he had honest eyes. Susan smiled for the first time. Then let's find out what Mr. Halloran drafted. I drove home that night lighter than I'd felt in months. But when I looked him up, Halloran had retired years ago, his old firm folded, his files boxed and shipped to storage. One name, one warehouse. One thin thread. I decided it was enough. My mother must have felt the ground shift because she called me 2 days later. I let it ring twice, then answered with my recorder app running because Susan told me to document everything and I take instruction well. Sharon opened sweet, the way she always does. Sweetheart, I've been so worried about you. Christmas got out of hand. Your father feels terrible. I doubted every word, but I said nothing. Silence makes manipulators nervous, and hers curdled fast. I heard you've been calling the county, digging around. Do you know how that makes me look? There it was. Not worry. Reputation. You always have to be the difficult one, she went on, her voice hardening. Ever since you were little. Just like whoever your father really was. I sat very still. There it was again. The old poison. The thing they'd whispered my whole life and never once said straight out. That I wasn't really Roy's. That I'd come from some affair. Some stranger. Some shameful footnote. For years it had lived in the space between jokes. Now she'd said it plainly on a recorded line, and she didn't even realize the gift she'd handed me. Mom, I said, calm as a Sunday, is there something you'd like to tell me about my father? She backpedaled instantly. Don't twist my words. You know exactly what I mean. Then she pivoted to the play she always runs. After everything I've done for you, you'd tear this family apart over money? You should be ashamed." I hung up and looked at Lily, who was at the kitchen table drawing Grandma Ruth again, tongue poking out in concentration. My mother had built an entire story about where I came from, and it was finally time to test it against the truth. The phone tree lit up after that. My Aunt Carol called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart during her golden years. A cousin messaged that I was being greedy and unchristian. It's a particular kind of pressure, the way a family closes ranks around the people with the most to hide. They don't argue the facts. They argue your character. They make you the villain for noticing. The old me might have folded. The old me apologized for taking up space. But I had a daughter watching how her mother handled being pushed, and I was done teaching her to shrink. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself in the group chat. I just saved every message, screenshot after screenshot, into the folder marked Ruth. Then Meredith texted me directly, and my sister has never been as smart as she thinks she is. "Just drop it, Dana," she wrote. "Nobody believes you anyway." I didn't answer, so she kept going, digging herself a hole in real time. "That money was supposed to fix my house. You have no idea the position you're putting Mom in." And there it was, in writing, from the woman who inherited nothing. That money. So there was money, and Meredith knew about it, and it had a destination, and the destination was her renovation. I read it twice, then I set the phone down and actually laughed, which startled Lily. "You okay, Mommy?" she asked. "I'm better than okay, baby," I said, because my sister had just confirmed the money existed. Now I only had to prove whose it really was, and where every dollar of it had gone. The numbers were already talking. My family was just helping me write down their confession. Finding Halloran's files was its own small odyssey. His practice had been absorbed by a younger firm, and Susan sent a formal request on my behalf, with the authorization paperwork that makes these things legitimate rather than nosy. It took 10 days. Then I drove 40 minutes to a low brick building where a paralegal met me with a banker's box and a clipboard. I signed for access to the archived client records, and she left me at a folding table under a buzzing fluorescent light. My hands were not steady. I found the index first, a typed list of documents, and I ran my finger down it until I hit the line that made my breath catch. Ruth Freeman, last will and testament, executed 2019. My grandmother had made a will in 2019, not the version filed with the county, a different one, 3 years before she died, when she was sharp as a tack and running her own garden and beating me at cards. I flipped to the matching folder, my pulse loud in my ears. The folder was there. The tab was there. But inside, there was nothing. Just an empty sleeve where a document should have been. I actually said no, out loud, to an empty room. I asked the paralegal if files ever got separated. She checked her notes and frowned. "Sometimes clients take the originals home. Says here Mrs. Freeman wanted to keep her original herself. Said she'd store it in her own safe place." Her own safe place. I sat there under that ugly light, and something loosened in my chest. Because I knew Grandma Ruth. I knew her house. I knew exactly the kind of place she'd call safe, and I knew nobody in my family would ever think to look there. Grandma Ruth gave me a key to the Cedar Lane house years ago, just in case, and nobody ever asked for it back. The house was in legal limbo now, part of the disputed estate, sitting empty while the lawyers circled. I let myself in on a gray Saturday afternoon while Lily was at a friend's. The air was still and smelled of dust and old lavender, and grief hit me sideways in the front hall. Everything was where she'd left it. Her reading glasses on the side table. The Afghan folded over the recliner. I walked through slowly, letting the memories come, and I ended up where I always ended up as a child, in her kitchen. This was the room that raised me. The counter where she taught me lemon bars. The window where she kept her African violets. And on the shelf above the stove, exactly where it had lived my whole life, sat her recipe tin, a dented old thing painted with faded cherries. She used to keep her handwritten cards in it, and every holiday she'd pull one out and hand it to whichever grandkid was underfoot. She'd handed one to Lily just last year, the lemon bars, in that same kitchen. I lifted the tin down. It was heavier than a box of recipe cards should be. My heart was going like a drum. I pried off the lid and there were the cards, yellowed and stained with vanilla, decades of her handwriting. But underneath them, wrapped in wax paper the way she wrapped everything precious, was a thick envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's careful cursive, were a few words that made my knees give out. For Dana, when they say you don't belong. I sat down right there on the kitchen floor, the linoleum cold through my jeans, and I opened it. 2 things were inside. The first was a document with a blue backing and a notary's stamp, the original last will and testament of Ruth Freeman, signed and witnessed in 2019. My hands shook so badly I had to lay it flat to read. It was not the version filed with the county. This one had a clause the fake had erased, and I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. Her estate was to pass to the lineal descendants of my son, Roy Freeman, per stirpes. Per stirpes. I knew that term from work. It means the inheritance flows down by bloodline, split between the branches of the family tree, each child's line taking an equal share. Roy's line and Meredith's line, down to the grandchildren, which meant my daughter, Lily, was a named and rightful heir, and no whispered story about where I came from could change what was written in black ink and notarized. And there was more. The will specified that the Cedar Lane house should go to my granddaughter Dana, or to whichever of my descendants has the greatest need of a home. A roof. She'd left me a roof, in writing, 3 years before she died. The second thing in the envelope was a letter, 4 handwritten pages, and I could hear her voice in every line. She wrote that she knew Sharon had been telling ugly stories about me for years. She wrote, plain as day, Dana is Roy's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself, the morning you were born, and I counted your fingers. She wrote that she was leaving the original with her recipes because that woman goes through everything, but she has never once cooked a thing in her life. I laughed and sobbed at the same time, alone on that floor. I had my grandmother's word. But a dead woman's word against the living needs more than faith. It needs proof. It needs science. I brought everything to Susan the following Monday, laid out on her desk like evidence, which is what it now was. She read the will twice and went very quiet. This changes the case entirely, she said. This is the true will, and it names Lily. The filed version looks fraudulent. Then she got to the harder part. But your parents built their whole justification on a claim about your paternity. As long as that lie is floating out there, they'll use it to argue you and Lily don't belong in Roy's line. I asked the obvious question. How do you kill a lie that old? The same way you prove anything, she said. You test it. A DNA test, done properly, through an accredited lab with a documented chain of custody, would settle it beyond argument. The problem was Roy. I couldn't force my father to swab his cheek out of the goodness of his heart. But Susan smiled the way lawyers smile when the other side has made a mistake. Here's the beautiful part, she said. They put your paternity at issue. Your father called Lily not real family in front of witnesses. Your mother repeated the claim. When a party raises paternity to strip an heir, the court can order genetic testing to resolve it. I sat with that. My family had spent decades using my supposed blood to push me out, and now that same weapon, the one they'd sharpened for years, could be turned around and pointed the other way, entirely through legal channels, entirely in the open. They used blood to erase my daughter, I said. So we'll use blood to put her back. Susan nodded. That's the case. I drove home past the orthodontist's office and, for the first time, didn't flinch at the sign in the window. While the legal machinery ground forward, I did what I'm actually good at. I built a spreadsheet. This is my superpower, unglamorous as it is. Give me enough statements and enough coffee, and I will find every dollar that ever tried to hide. Susan's subpoena hadn't landed yet, but between the forwarded statement, the probate filings, and the public property records, I had enough to start mapping the shape of the theft. The picture that emerged made me sick and steady at the same time. The certificate of deposit, $113,000, closed and taken in cash 3 months after Grandma died. Then a second thread. My mother, as executor, had refinanced the Cedar Lane house before the estate was even settled, pulling out $90,000 in equity against a home she didn't have clear title to give away. Added up, and more than $200,000 had moved out of my grandmother's estate and into my mother's control. From there, it split. A chunk to Meredith, right around the time of that granite kitchen, and one line that stopped me cold. $18,000, wired in installments, to a casino resort 3 states away. I sat back in my chair. My mother wasn't stealing to buy cruises and impress the neighbors, or not only that. My mother was in debt. Gambling debt, from the look of it. The quiet kind that eats a retirement account from the inside. That was the engine under all of it. Not vanity. Desperation and greed, wearing a Christmas apron. I labeled every cell, cross-referenced every date, and I felt no satisfaction, only a cold clarity. Numbers don't lie, and these ones were confessing on every row. Susan filed everything at once, and I'll admit it felt like stepping off a ledge. We filed a challenge to the admitted will based on the newly discovered original from 2019. We petitioned to compel a full executor's accounting, and we filed the motion for genetic testing, quoting my father's own words back to the court, the ones he'd said over my daughter's head on Christmas night. When my mother was served, I wasn't there, but I heard about it. She called me that evening, and this time the sweetness was gone in under a minute. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You've hired a lawyer against your own mother, against your own family." I kept my voice level. I hired a lawyer against the person who took Grandma's money and lied to a court about it. She started to cry, that practiced, wet, weaponized crying I'd heard my whole life, the kind that always used to make me apologize for existing. It didn't work anymore. "You'll regret this," she said, and the tears dried up fast when threats worked better. "You have no idea what you're doing." I told her I had a very precise idea, down to the penny, and I hung up. People kept telling me to let it go, that family is family, that I should think of my mother's age. But letting it go would have taught Lily that the loudest person in the room always wins, and that some truths are too expensive to say out loud. I wasn't willing to teach her that. If you believe kids learn courage from watching their mothers refuse to back down, hit like and subscribe, because the hearing is where all of it finally came out. A court date was set for the spring. The loops my family had spent years tying shut were about to come undone, one at a time. The subpoenaed bank records arrived in a fat manila envelope, and I cleared my whole kitchen table to spread them out. Everything I'd reconstructed from scraps was now confirmed in the bank's own cold print. The CD, closed 3 months after death, cashed by the executor, the refinance on Cedar Lane, the transfers to Meredith, the wires to the casino resort. It was all there, dated and signed, exactly as I'd mapped it, and seeing the official version made it real in a way even my spreadsheet hadn't. But the records held one thing I hadn't predicted, and it turned a civil case into something much worse for my mother. Tucked in the estate file was a document authorizing the CD's closure, a power of attorney form, supposedly signed by Grandma Ruth. Except the date on it was after she died. My mother had signed my grandmother's name to a legal document weeks after we buried her. I stared at that page for a long time. This wasn't just a woman taking more than her share of an estate. This was forgery. My mother had put a dead woman's signature on paper to get her hands on the cash. I photographed it, backed it up in 3 places, and emailed a scan to Susan with a single line. Susan called me within the hour, and her voice had a new edge. "Dana," she said, "this changes what we're dealing with. This isn't only probate anymore." I sat in my quiet kitchen with the whole ugly map laid out in front of me, and I thought about my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper because she knew, that the woman she'd raised her son to marry would go through everything. She'd been right, and she'd left me the one thing that could make it matter. The court granted the motion for genetic testing, and my father was ordered to provide a sample. There's a particular justice in a man being compelled, by the very system he thought protected him, to prove the thing he'd used as a weapon. I wasn't in the room for the swab, but I was in the courthouse hallway afterward, waiting on Susan, when my father came out. We hadn't spoken since Christmas. He looked older than I remembered, smaller, his good coat hanging loose on him. For a moment I thought he'd walk past me without a word. Instead he stopped, and something almost human crossed his face. "You don't understand the hole your mother's in," he said quietly. "The debt. You have no idea." And for 1 second, one honest second, I saw a tired old man who'd spent 40 years covering for a woman he was afraid of, and I felt something dangerously close to pity. Then he ruined it. His jaw set, and the softness slammed shut like a screen door. "But you're still tearing this family apart," he said. "Over money. Ruth would be ashamed of you." I let that sit. I thought about Ruth's letter, folded in my bag, the one that said the exact opposite in her own hand. "Grandma left me a letter, Dad," I said. "You should read what she'd actually be ashamed of." His face went slack, the same slackness from the Christmas table, and this time I understood what it was. It was fear, not of me, of the results, of a truth he'd helped bury finally clawing its way up. He turned and walked out into the parking lot without another word, and I watched him go, and I did not call after him. The wait for the DNA results was the longest 2 weeks of my life. Labs take their time, and the case sat suspended in that time, everything hinging on a cheek swab. The family split down the middle while we waited. A few of the relatives who'd scolded me went quiet, then started asking careful questions, the way people do when they realize they may have bet on the wrong horse. My Aunt Carol, who'd accused me of breaking my mother's heart, called to say she'd always wondered about that money. Loyalty is a fair weather thing when the weather turns. Then Meredith reached out, and her tone had changed completely. "Can we just talk?" she wrote. "Sister to sister, please, away from the lawyers." A month earlier that message might have gotten me. She was still my sister. But I'd learned something about my family, which is that the moment they want to talk privately is the moment they're most afraid of what's about to happen publicly. "Anything you want to say can go through Susan," I replied, and I meant it. I won't pretend I wasn't scared, though. Late at night, the old fear crept in. What if I was wrong? What if the story they'd told my whole life turned out to be true, and I'd built all of this on sand? I'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling and feel 9 years old again, the kid who didn't fit. But then I'd think about Grandma Ruth's hands on my face. "You've got my mother's eyes, sweet girl." I chose to believe her over them. And on a Thursday afternoon, while Lily colored at the table, an email landed in my inbox with a subject line that made everything stop. "Your results are ready." I didn't open it right away. I made Lily a snack first, apple slices and peanut butter, because my hands needed something ordinary to do. Then I took my laptop into the bedroom, closed the door, and clicked. There was a lot of technical language, probability indices, and marker comparisons, the kind of thing I usually love. But my eyes went straight to the conclusion, printed in bold near the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Roy Freeman was my father. Not probably, not likely. 99.99%, which in that world is as close to certain as a human being gets. I read it, and I want to tell you I felt vindicated, but it was quieter than that, and it went deeper. Every party where my mother said I came from somewhere else, every whispered joke, every time I'd stood at the edge of my own family and wondered if I was the reason I didn't fit, all of it, a lie. A convenient, cruel, profitable lie, invented to justify writing me and my daughter out of a will and pocketing what my grandmother meant for us. I sat on the edge of my bed and let a few tears fall, but they weren't sad tears. They were the tears you cry when a weight you've carried since childhood finally gets set down. I was Roy Freeman's daughter. I always had been. Lily was Ruth Freeman's rightful great-granddaughter, named in a will, backed by science, and no man on earth could pull her chair out from under her again. I dried my face, walked back out to the kitchen, and helped my daughter with her homework. Some victories you don't shout. You just breathe them. 2 days later, the settlement offer came, and I understood at once that it was a trap wearing a bow. Sharon's attorney reached out to Susan with terms. My mother would pay me a modest sum, well below what the estate actually owed, in exchange for dropping the challenge and signing a non-disclosure agreement. In other words, take a little money and agree to never tell anyone what she'd done. The family closed ranks around the offer immediately. My aunt called it the mature thing. A cousin said, "Just take it and let your mother keep her dignity." Even part of me was tempted, and I'll be honest about that, because I'm not made of stone and I'm not rich. The number they offered would have covered Lily's braces and a year of rent and a cushion I hadn't had in years. For about an hour, I let myself imagine it. Then I imagined explaining it to Lily someday. Explaining that the truth had a price, and I'd sold it, and the people who pushed her off a chair had bought their way out with pocket change and a piece of paper that said I'd stay quiet. I imagined teaching her that a signature can make a wrong thing disappear if the check clears. "No," I told Susan. "No NDA. We go to the hearing." Susan actually sounded pleased. "I was hoping you'd say that." My mother had put a dollar figure on my silence, but she'd made a fundamental error in her math, the kind I catch in other people's books every day. She'd valued the wrong thing. My silence was never for sale. My daughter's dignity was worth more than the whole estate, and I was about to prove it in a room where she couldn't lie. The week before the hearing, Susan and I built our case the way I balance a ledger, line by line, until everything reconciled. We had the original 2019 will, notarized, with the per stirps clause that named Lily's line. We had Grandma Ruth's 4-page letter in her own hand, describing the lie and swearing to my birth. We had the DNA results, 99.99%. We had the subpoenaed bank records, the closed CD, the refinance, the transfers, the casino wires. And we had the forged power of attorney, my grandmother's signature dated after her own funeral. Susan organized it into exhibits, tabbed and numbered, and she gave me one piece of advice I took to heart. "Don't perform," she said. "You don't need to. The paper does the shouting. You stay calm and let them be the ones who lose control." I practiced saying less. That's harder than it sounds for a woman who spent her life over-explaining herself to people who'd already decided she was wrong, but I understood the power of it now. On Christmas night, I'd put a folded page on the table and said 4 quiet words as a bluff, just to watch their faces. I found Grandma's will. Back then I'd been guessing. Now I had the real thing, notarized and true, sitting in a folder with a DNA report clipped behind it. I decided I would say those same words again, in that courtroom, at the right moment. Not as a bluff this time, as a verdict. I laid out my clothes the night before, sensible and plain, the way you dress when you want the room looking at the evidence and not at you. Then I checked on Lily, asleep with a crayon still in her hand, and I promised her one more time. This ends now. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected. All pale wood and quiet, the kind of room where things get decided without any drama at all, which is its own kind of drama. I arranged for Lily to stay with my friend Renee that day. Whatever happened, my daughter was not going to sit in a room and hear her family fight over whether she counted. Some things a 9-year-old should never have to watch. I got there early and sat with Susan, my folder squared on the table in front of me. Then my family filed in. My father came in stiff and gray, avoiding my eyes. Meredith sat behind them, arms crossed, and my mother swept in like she was the wronged party at her own tribunal, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she'd clearly prepared in the car. When the judge entered, my mother's attorney rose and painted her as a grieving widow's daughter, a devoted executor, a woman under attack by an ungrateful child chasing money. I sat still and let it wash over me. Every word he said was a wall, and I had the wrecking ball folded neatly in a manila folder. The judge, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses and a flat, patient voice, called the matter to order. She looked over the top of her glasses at the two sides. "This is a hearing on a contested will and a petition regarding the conduct of the executor," she said. "Let's proceed." I put my hand flat on my folder. Under the fluorescent lights in that hushed little room, I thought about the sound of a chair scraping across a hardwood floor and my daughter hitting the ground while 11 adults said nothing. And I got very, very calm. My mother testified first, and she was good, I'll give her that. Years of playing the victim had made her fluent in it. She told the judge that Grandma Ruth had always wanted everything to go to Roy and Meredith. She said she'd acted only as a faithful executor, that the estate had been modest, that she'd never taken anything that wasn't proper. She dabbed her eyes at all the right moments. When Susan rose to cross-examine, she did it gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Mrs. Freeman, you've testified the estate was modest. Are you familiar with a certificate of deposit in the amount of $113,000? A pause. I don't recall the exact accounts. Susan slid the exhibit forward. This one was closed and cashed 3 months after the decedent's death. The authorizing signature is yours, as executor. Do you recall it now? My mother's composure cracked at the edges. That was estate business. It was handled properly. Susan let a beat pass. And the $90,000 in equity you pulled from the Cedar Lane house before the estate was settled? Also estate business? My mother's voice climbed. That house was ours. It was always going to be ours. There it was, the truth leaking through the performance. Not Grandma's wishes. Ours. Susan didn't raise her voice at all. And the $18,000 wired to a casino resort in another state. Whose business was that? The courtroom went very still. My mother's mouth opened and closed. I don't have to explain my personal finances, she snapped, forgetting for a moment that she was the executor of someone else's money. The judge made a small note. I sat perfectly quiet, hands folded, watching my mother do the one thing I never could get her to do at any dinner table in my life: answer for herself. Then Susan turned to the will itself, and this was the part I'd waited months for. Your Honor, the will admitted to probate was filed by Mrs. Freeman as executor. We've submitted a different document, the original last will and testament of Ruth Freeman, notarized and witnessed in 2019, 3 years before her death. She handed it up. The judge read in silence, and the silence stretched, and I watched my mother's face drain as she realized which document had surfaced from the dead. This original, Susan continued, contains a clause absent from the filed version. It leaves the estate to the lineal descendants of Roy Freeman, per stirpes. By bloodline, that includes the decedent's great-granddaughter, Lily Freeman. My father shifted in his seat. Susan wasn't done. The decedent also left a letter with the original will. She read a passage aloud, and hearing Grandma Ruth's words in that formal room undid something in my chest. Dana is Roy's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself, the morning you were born, and I counted your fingers. My father surged half out of his chair. My mother was confused. He burst out. She didn't know what she was signing. She was an old woman. The judge looked at him over her glasses, unimpressed. Mr. Freeman, the document is notarized, with 2 witnesses who attest to her competence. Sit down, please. He sat, but he'd already done the damage, and everyone in that room heard it. He'd just called his own mother senile in open court to keep her money. That was the moment his last shred of standing died, and he knew it, and his face went the color of ash. My mother reached over and grabbed his sleeve, hissing something at him to be quiet. 2 thieves, finally cornered, turning on each other in a room full of witnesses. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the strange level calm of a column of numbers that finally added up. Susan let their outburst hang in the air, then quietly laid the last exhibit before the court. One final matter, Your Honor. The respondents have long maintained that Ms. Freeman is not the biological daughter of Roy Freeman, and used that claim to justify excluding her line from the estate. Mr. Freeman repeated it publicly this past Christmas. We moved for genetic testing. These are the results. She handed up the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Dana Freeman is Roy Freeman's daughter. The claim used to disinherit her and her child is false. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock. The judge read the report, set it down, and looked at my parents for a long, cool moment. Then she turned to me. "Ms. Freeman, is there anything you'd like to add?" I stood up. I'd waited my whole life for a room to actually turn and look at me, and now that it had, I didn't need to fill it with noise. I looked at my mother, who'd told me at a Christmas table that blood is blood and I wasn't. I looked at my father, who'd pulled a chair out from under a 9-year-old. I kept my voice as calm as still water, and I said the same 4 words I'd said that night, only now they were true and proven and impossible to take back. "I found Grandma's will." Then, softer, just loud enough for the record. "And Grandma found the truth first." My mother broke. Not the practiced tears this time, the real ones, ugly and furious. "You've destroyed me," she cried, half rising. "You've destroyed this whole family, you ungrateful girl, after everything I gave you." She was shouting now, spit flying, the mask gone completely, while I stood there with my hands folded, saying nothing at all. My father had turned white as the paper in the judge's hand and couldn't meet my eyes. The judge tapped her gavel once, sharp. "That's enough, Mrs. Freeman. We'll recess while I review these exhibits." And I sat back down, perfectly steady, and waited for the truth to be read into the record. When the judge returned, she didn't waste words, and I've never heard anything more beautiful than a plain recitation of facts. She found the will admitted to probate invalid and recognized the 2019 original as my grandmother's true last testament. She removed my mother as executor, effective immediately, for breach of fiduciary duty. She ordered restitution of the funds taken from the estate, the full amount pulled from the CD and the home equity, more than $200,000, plus a surcharge for the losses her conduct had caused. Then she addressed the forged power of attorney directly, her voice flat and final. Signing a deceased person's name to a legal instrument, she said, was a matter she was referring to the district attorney's office for review. My mother made a small, wounded sound. Meredith, who had spent the money she was now going to have to return, put her face in her hands, and the estate itself was ordered distributed the way Ruth Freeman actually wrote it. Per stirpes, by bloodline, my line and Meredith's line each taking a share. The Cedar Lane house, per my grandmother's own words, to the descendant with the greatest need of a home. That was me. That was Lily. Nobody in that courtroom applauded, and I didn't want them to. There's no applause for the moment a lie finally collapses under its own weight. There's just the quiet, and the truth standing where the lie used to be. I gathered my folder, squared the edges the way I always do, and I thought about my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper, trusting that someday the right person would go looking in the one place that woman never would. She'd bet on me. She'd been right. The final number had come in, and for the first time in my family's history, it was honest. My mother caught me in the hallway outside, because of course she did. The fury was already gone, swapped out for the soft, pleading voice she keeps for when the other tools stop working. "Dana, sweetheart, please." She reached for my arm. "We're still family. You can't just cut us off. I'm your mother." I stopped and looked at her, and I felt no urge to scream, no urge to explain, none of the old churning need for her to finally understand me. That need was just gone, set down somewhere back in that courtroom. "You told me blood is blood," I said quietly, "and that I wasn't. You said it at a Christmas table, in front of my daughter." She started to say she hadn't meant it. I didn't let her. "Here's what you taught me, Mom. Blood is blood. And it was never enough. Not the way you did it." I gently took my arm back. "You can talk to my lawyer. That's the number you have now." Then I walked out of that courthouse into a bright, cold afternoon, and I did not look back to see whether she was watching. For the first time in 34 years, I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table. I was going home to build one of my own. By late spring, it was done. The restitution went into a trust with Lily's name on it, safe where no one could ever quietly cash it out again. And we moved into the house on Cedar Lane, the one my grandmother left in writing for whoever needed a roof the most. The first thing Lily claimed was the kitchen. She stands at the same counter where Ruth taught me lemon bars, tongue poking out in concentration, and she has become alarmingly good at them. My mother is facing a review by the district attorney over the forged signature, and a civil judgment she'll be paying down for years. My father has gone silent, which is the only apology a man like him knows how to give. Meredith had to return the money she'd already spent, granite and all, and we don't speak, and that's all right. I set the boundary I should have set a decade ago. Contact goes through my attorney. There are no shared holidays. It isn't cruelty. It's a fence. And good fences let you finally rest in your own yard. Lily is back in art class. Her braces went on in April, and she has not once, since we moved, asked me why anyone in our family hated her. Because she doesn't feel it anymore, and neither do I. Some nights, after Lily's asleep, I sit in Grandma Ruth's kitchen with a cup of tea and just listen to how quiet a peaceful house can be. Last week, Lily looked up from her homework at that counter and asked me, almost shy, "Mommy, do we really get to live here? For real?" I told her yes, for real. This is our home now, and nobody is ever taking it. Grandma Ruth wanted it this way, I said. She left it to us on purpose. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her math, humming, completely at ease in a house where she is wanted. That's the thing my parents never understood, the thing that cost them everything in the end. They thought family was a locked door you could shove people away from. My grandmother knew better. Family is who counts your fingers on the morning you're born and tells the truth about it, even from the grave. Blood never gave anyone the right to make my daughter feel small, and the day I stopped begging for a seat at their table was the day I finally built one of our own. That's my story. One shove, 4 quiet words, and a grandmother who told the truth from inside a recipe tin, trusting the right person would come looking. If this reminded you that being calm is not the same as being weak, and that your child's dignity is worth more than any amount of family peace, take that as your sign to hold your ground. If someone you love needs to hear it, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.